Welcome to the class. So today we will be discussing the coagulation flocculation theory part. This is in the unit 3. We are into unit 3, that is unit process in the municipal water treatment plant. So that is unit process. Okay, T. So here basically we are treating the water raw. We have collected the raw water from the river source or whatever is the surface of the groundwater source, and then we are purifying the water. So the first step we have seen is the once the raw water comes to the from the river, first it goes into the aeration tank. So first we have the aeration tank. We have seen the main purpose of aeration tank, and also after aeration tank water goes into primary sedimentation tank. So in the lecture 6 basically we have discussed about primary sedimentation tank. So after primary sedimentation tank, now the cleaned water will go to next chamber, and where we add some chemicals into it. Okay, that portion we call it coagulation and flocculation. So this coagulation flocculation, today we'll be discussing that in detail. So now you can correlate. So initially we have collected the river source, water from the surface source, and then through conveyance pipe water reached up to the water treatment plant. In that first chamber is basically the aeration tank. After aeration tank, water reaches to primary sedimentation. So we have seen in the last lecture also, because of the gravity force, basically we are the solid particle, there is larger size of solid particle will be settled down at the bottom. We have seen the different equations also, like Stokes equation and all, how the particles is settled down into the river, into the tank at the bottom, and we have seen the different types of tank, all the schematics figure we have seen. The entire process is clear now. So now after the primary sedimentation tank, water goes into the next step, that is the coagulation and flocculation tank. So now why we need again one more time of filtration. So now as we have seen earlier also, for example, this is a water body, right? So water body is composed of solid particles. So solid particles, some are very very large particle, means the weight of each particle is very high, right? So the compared to the surface area, so the weight or mass is very high. So in that case, if you keep the water into a rest condition, what will happen? This particle will simply settle down at the bottom because of gravity, and that's what we have done. So we have removed this type of the particles, by the gravity force, and remove. Now the water goes into next chamber. But water is not only composed of this large particle, even the fine particle also will be present in the water. That particle we call it colloids. So colloids are basically the fine particle, which has the surface area is more and the mass is very less. So you can imagine it is a very fine particle where the mass is very negligible and the surface area is more. So in that case, those particles won't settle down at the bottom, because this will be simply suspended on the water, right? So in the primary sedimentation tank, which we have discussed in the last class in detail, sedimentation tank, in that what the particles are settled down because of the force gravity. But here the particles mass is so less that it is simply suspended, it is roaming on the water, right? So that particle we call it colloidal particle. So now we have to remove that also, colloidal particle also, from the water. So that is to remove that part, we need this coagulation flocculation tank for that. So let's first understand the general properties of colloid. So you understand these small particles are still there after, even after primary sedimentation tank. So these are the very fine particle, mass is less, so it does not settle down in the primary sedimentation tank, it came into the water. So the colloidal particles are so small that the surface area in relation to the mass is very large. That means the surface area means you can see the outside area. That is, we call it surface area. Surface area is very large compared to the mass. So mass is very less. That's why it is not settled down because of the gravity force. So the surface area is very large. Now, second property is electrical property. So each colloidal particle actually carries some charge. Either it may be positive charge or it may be negative charge. So all the colloidal particles are electrically charged. If any anode, so we have studied in the physics, right, in the 910 standard, like we have the DC current, in that you have the positives and the negative end. So from the positive end, something like that, this electron flow is going on, right, from negative to positive, yeah, electron is going on. So that's why, so if you keep any negative electrode here in this water, what will happen? All these small colloidal particles will be attracted to this electrical pole. So that is mentioned. If the any electrode is from the DC source, that is the direct current source, are placed into the colloidal solution, the particle migrates towards the pole, because particles are also charged. Either it may positive charge or negative charge. So it will attract to the opposite electrode, and it will go near to that electrode. So colloidal particles are in constant motion, right? This colloidal particle, it won't settle down at the bottom. This will be in constant motion, and this motion we call it Brownian motion. You have studied in the earlier physics class, right? The Brownian motion. So this colloidal particle exhibits the Brownian motion. Always it will, will be suspended. It will be roaming at a constant speed throughout the solution. So another fourth effect or fourth properties of colloidal particle is the Tyndall effect. So what is Tyndall effect? So basically colloidal particle are actually have a dimensionless, means there are reversible upon heating, means some, like, you have, for example, if you heat the water, what will happen, this colloidal particle will change its properties. Right, if you give a positive, I mean, it can change the type also, electron type also. Sometimes it will be positive, sometimes it will be negative. So basically you can change the effect or the properties of the colloidal particle by heating. For example, heating the organics in the water. So water, some organic matters will be there in the water. So if you heat the water, what will happen, this organic matter will change its properties. So that we call it tidal effect. Now the fifth properties of colloidal is the colloidal have a high surface area and hence have a lot of active surface for the absorption to occur. So as I mentioned, colloidal particles are very fine. Very fine means very small particle. So it will have very high surface area. Surface area means you understand the outside area I am talking about. So this is very high surface area. Hence it has a high probability to be absorbed by some other particle. So the stability of the colloidal is mainly due to the preferential absorption of ions. Okay, there are two types of colloidals, you will find it out. So one is first type of colloidal, we call it lipophobic colloidal. Basically these are solvent heading, right? So these are irreversible upon heating. For example, inorganic colloidals, metal. So all this basically once you heat the colloidals, once it change from the property, one property to A property to B property, it will be after you heat it. But it is irreversible, means after you cool it down, the properties won't reverse. So those type of colloids we call it lipophobic colloid. Okay, that is irreversible, means the properties won't change after you heat it. It will change to properties will change to A to B state, but once you cool it won't come to its original A state. But another type of colloid we call it lipophilic colloid. So in that case, these are actually solvent loving. That means these are reversible, means once you heat it, it will be into some other position state, but once you cool it, it will come into some other position. So like organics in the water, right? These are the two different types of colloid. So these are the five properties of colloid. So first one is colloid will have a high surface area. Next one is colloid will be electrically charged. Either it may be positive or it may be negative. Colloids always have a motion, constant motion, that we call it Brownian motion. Then it will have Tyndall effect, and then it will have a absorption property also. So these are the five important properties of colloid. So why we are studying the colloidal properties? Because our main objective is to remove the colloids from the water, right? So large particle already we have removed in the earlier treatment, primary sedimentation tank. Now in this step basically we are removing the colloids, means small particles. So to remove the small particle, we have to understand the properties of the particles. So once we know the properties, so based on these properties basically we have to the remove the colloidal particles from the water. So so coagulation and flocculation. So coagulation and flocculation are basically the two methods basically in which we are removing the coagulants. We are removing the colloidal particles. So colloidal particles are very difficult to separate from the water because they are so tiny, right? And they won't settle by the gravity. So they will pass through the pores like in the filter medium. So even after primary sedimentation tank, water goes into filtration. Even in filtration also, the small pores will be there, right, in the filter media. So in the filtration media, the small pores of this colloidal material particle will pass through. So using this filtration or screening, right, we cannot separate out the colloidal particle. So we have to use some other technique to filter this colloidal particle. So to be removed, the individual colloidal must be aggregate and grow its size. So what we can do is somehow the small colloidal particles we have to make it a large particle. Means each colloidal particle will attract another nearby colloidal particle, so that the size of the particle will increase. Once the size will increase, that means the mass also will increase. Then we can apply the gravity and this particle will be settled down at the bottom. So somehow we have to combine, or we have to aggregate the colloidal particles. So in a water, now you understand, this type of small particles will be there. We call it colloidal particle. So somehow we have to combine this colloidal particle, like 2, 3, 4 colloidal particle. If you combine it, then the dimension or the weight will be increased, right? So that now after the weight will be increased, this particle can be settled down at the bottom. So our main objective will be to combine these small particles, right? So this aggregation of colloidal particle can be considered as involving two steps, basically in two steps basically we can do that. So first one is, as we discussed earlier also, that colloidal particle has a property called, it will have charge, like either it may be positively charged or it may be negatively charged. So somehow we have to bring two colloidal particle nearby, and then because of positive negative charge, it will attract each other, and the particle dimension will increase. So these are the steps basically. First one is particle transport to affect the interparticle collision, so that two particles should come together and there will be collision to each particle. So positive negative will attract each other, and that is the first step, means transportation, means each particle should be coming together. Now, next step is basically particle destabilization to permit attachment when the contact occurs. So then again, the particle has to be destabilized. Means positive, negative has to be destabilized. If it is in a stable condition, that it won't attract each other, right? Somehow we have to make the reaction start. Means we have to destabilize so that positive will go towards negative, negative will go towards positive. So this type of destabilization we have to do it. Then only this aggregation will be happening. So that the transport step is known as flocculation. So flocculation is a process where the particle is transporting, means one location to another location particle is going, that we call it flocculation. Whereas coagulation is the overall process involving destabilization and transport. So coagulation is the overall process, we are destabilizing as well as the transportation both, whereas transportation we call it flocculation. Transport step we call it the flocculation. So with these properties, basically we are aggregating the particles, colloidal particles, and ultimately when the size of the particle increases, it will be settled down at the bottom. So here what is happening inside, now we'll see the mechanism of this collision and then that coagulation and the flocculation. So the electric double layer will be forming. What is electric double layer? So basically if you see, this is the figure which shows how the positive and negative charge forms on a water. So each colloidal particle, so you can see, although the individual hydrophobic colloidal have electric charge, right, each particle will be electrically charged, but the entire colloidal solution will have net electric charge is zero. Means whatever positive charge is present in the water, same quantity of negative charge is also present in the water. That's why the entire charge of the entire water solid particle, water particle will be zero, right? So both are equal. So the diffuse layer in a colloidal dispersion contains a quantity of counter ions. Means if positive ion is there, means there will be same number of negative ion also. So that's why, so you can see this a is a curve. Basically this is distance from the surface. So a particle, how much is distance from the surface, and the ion concentration. So ion concentration is very high at the surface of the water. So when you go further, depth, in that case the ion concentration will sometimes reduce. So you can see this a particle, the concentration is high at the surface level. Whenever you are increasing the surface, whenever you are increasing the depth, basically the concentration also will reduce. So if A is a positive ion, there will be A star also. So A star is counter ion. Like A star, if it is positive, A star will be negative. Similarly, if you have a B, then B, if it is B positive, then you have the B dash also, that is negative. So always there will be equal number of positive ion as well as negative ion also. So that's why the net charge of this body will be zero. So this figure you can see how the actual process takes place. So this is a double layer. So double layer repulsion means there will be all the positive. If this layer is positive, means all the positive will have repulsion force, whereas at the bottom, if it is negative, then the positive will attract towards negative thing. So what will happen, if you see this is a layer, means positive layer is formed at the top, or negative layer, whatever it may be. So if any particle is coming, so initially it will go near to this layer and there will be repulsion, right? If its particle is also positive and this layer also positive, so there will be repulsion once it reaches near to the surface, and due to repulsion force it comes to bottom, and there basically that van der Waal attraction will be happening, right? So the two particle will be combining each other and the size of the particle will increase. So that's how the mechanism is happening inside the water level. So neither net repulsion force, which may be considered as the energy barrier, must be overcome before the aggregation occurs. So before aggregation occurs at this point, the repulsion which is happening here, this should be overcome. Whatever repulsion force is there, that should overcome and it will come together. So now you understand what we have to do is, so let me draw it here. So now this is the water content is there. So many water content is composed of this type of particles, right? So colloidal particles, so these colloidal particles are very fine. So what we have to do is we have to make it charged, positive charge, negative charge, positive charge, negative charge. So these particles are actually charged, right? That means positive or negative. So what we have to do, there are two steps, right? One is the transportation, means two particle, first we have to keep it nearby. Okay, so that collision happened, means two particle collide each other. So this particle comes here, this particle comes here, there will be collision here. So the first we have to do the collision here. So one particle collides each other, then positive and negative will be come in contact to each other and it will attract. So the size of the each particle will increase. So once the particle were very fine at the beginning, when the two particle combine each other, the dimension of the particle will increase. So once the particle dimension increases, now because of gravity, now this will settle down at the bottom. So that is our main funda here. Basically, we are keep adding, we are adding some extra chemical. Basically, in this flocculation and coagulation step, basically some chemicals will be there. So through these chemicals, basically this entire process are converted. So there will be charge, positive, negative charge, and we are combining it, the transportation combining, and then the deposition at the bottom. So this is the overall flow chart happening here inside the water. So the destabilization of the colloidal dispersion. So particle destabilization can be achieved by four mechanisms. So we can adopt any of these four mechanisms to destabilize the particle, right? So first one is change the characteristics of the medium. So this medium means it is water medium, right? Now if we change the characteristics of the medium, means we if we add some chemicals, so that the medium characteristics also change, and, like some ions are continuously generating positive, negative, both, so that we are making the destabilization inside the water body. Similarly, another step we can do it is change the characteristics of the colloidal particle. So this first one is this medium itself, we are changing the properties. Next one is this colloidal particles are there, right? So now we are changing the properties of this colloidal particle. This is another way we can do that. So multiple ways we can do that. So this is another way we can do that. Third one is provide bridges. So what are these? Like immersement in the participate and the absorption and the interparticipation bridging. So there are basically four mechanisms so we can achieve this phenomenon which we have discussed. So now the double layer compression means we basically we are adding some chemicals into it so that the colloidal system could be destabilized by the addition of ions. Means some extra chemicals we are adding that will create the ion in the body. Okay, ion in the water body, which and it will change the colloidal properties. So the coagulating power of ion increases the ratio. Okay, you can see depending on again how much quantity of chemicals we have to add it. So all these things we have to find the optimum dosage. So this is the water. So we are adding some chemicals. So one normal coagulant is alum, right? So alum is a chemical. Basically, it has a property that coagulation and flocculation properties. Means once you add it, it will create positive and negative ion in the body, in the chemical, in the body. So each particle, coagulant particle, will be either positively charged or negatively charged. So positive and negative will combine together, and ultimately the dimension will be increased and it will settle down at the bottom. So next one we can do it is absorption and change of neutralization. So some chemicals are there, basically it are capable of being absorbed at the surface of the colloidal particle. So colloidal particles are there, right? So we add some other type of chemical where it will be absorbed by the coagulant, absorbed by the by this property, by the colloidal particles. So we are adding some extra chemical. This chemical will be absorbed by the coagulant which is present in the water. That's colloidal particles which is present in the water. So ultimately the dimension also particles will really increase and it will settle down at the bottom. So this is another way to do that. So we are using here absorption properties of the colloidal particles. So next, if any certain metal salts are added to the water or wastewater in sufficient amounts, again we have to add the sufficient amount. If you add small quantity of chemical, again the process may be delayed. Similarly, if you add more quantity of chemical, then again process may be delayed. So that's why we have to find out the optimal quantity of chemicals or the coagulants to be added into the water. So for that, laboratory experiment is required, and once you find it out the optimum quantity, then the process will be fast and it will be more efficient process. So sometimes what happens, so if we add certain metal salts basically to the water or wastewater in a sufficient amount, rapid formation of participants will occur. Okay, so that's why with sufficient amount we have to add it so that the rapid participation is happening in the colloidal. So colloidal may serve as the condensation nuclei for those participations and may become the process will be very fast basically. So that is another way to do that. And the last way to do that is the many different natural components such as starch, cellulose, right? These are the natural components also may be added into the water, and this will be synthetic polymetric compound known as effective coagulant agent. So basically this coagulant agent may be some natural coagulant agent also we can add it, such as starch or cellulose, right? This has a coagulation properties, means it will create the ion, positive ion and negative ion into the water, so that the colloidal particle also will be charged positive and negative, and ultimately it will be settled down at the bottom. So that is the properties of coagulant. So in this step basically what we have done is, the after water coming from the primary sedimentation tank, water goes into the coagulation and flocculation tank. Basically in this tank we are adding some extra chemicals, either it may be alum, right, or any other chemicals we are adding. So once the chemical has been added into the water, so it will create positive and negative ion. So the whatever small particles coagulants are present in the water, that will be either positively charged or it may be negatively charged, so that it will attract each other and the dimension of the particle will increase. So once the dimension increases, it will simply settle down at the bottom. So with this properties basically we are removing this colloidals, this fine particle also, from the water. So this concludes this lecture. Thank you.